Magic the Gathering kind of came out. I had been playing role-playing games up to that point, and Magic came out and everything kind of changed, right? Everybody who plays a card game like that immediately says, I can do this. And that was me. And so I started trying to design games, and they weren't good. They were terrible. And I ended up working with United States Playing Cards. We did a game called X-Files. It was actually a fairly successful card game that Fox pulled the plug on. So we lost that license, and we spent a few years doing some things like Scooby-Doo the card game, Age of Empires. We did a Zombies, the board game was originally done there. And then I started in earnest trying to get stuff published, and after a few years of disappointment and being told I wasn't good enough, I just kind of gave up. I still design games for myself, but I never tried publishing after that. Until 2008, I got my first board game published. Well, I got my first board game signed, and then it took 4 more years to actually see it in my hands, but that's a completely different story. And then since then, I've been working very hard to make games as much as possible. And now I work with a company called Portal Games from Poland. And we do some fairly well-known games like Imperial Settlers, Nourishing Eggs. Our new game, Rattle Battle, has been pretty popular for us time to time. So we have a lot of stuff. I'm the only US member of the company, everybody else is in Poland, which is an interesting dynamic for us, but it works. So here I am. I put some slides together, more for me than you, but it'll give you something to look at while I talk. I normally just kind of freeform, but I'm not going to subject you to that. The first thing I want to talk about is ideas and how important ideas are, and also how worthless ideas are. Ideas they have no value. That's it. It's that simple. Nobody's going to pay you for an idea. It's your idea. But everything begins with an idea. Everything begins with an idea, and everybody has them. That's why they're not worth anything. Action and execution is worth all of it, and that's the part that takes a lot of work. Nobody but you is going to be excited about your ideas. If you can find somebody who's excited about your ideas, then you should latch onto that person and build a team. And I challenge you to prove me wrong about this. Everybody's had that idea, oh, I'm going to make this, whatever, and it's going to be amazing, everybody's going to love it. And then you never follow through with it. And guess what? Nobody else got excited about it. And that's probably why the idea fell through. I didn't know how to throw chemistry into this, but I was told there's some chemistry people in the area. So I found a great chemist who had a great quote that says, the way to get good ideas is to get lots of ideas and throw away the bad ones. And that's the truth. The truth is, in order to have anything good, if you're a photographer, if you ever go to a wedding and watch a photographer, they take like 4,000 photographs, and then you get the album back and there's like 5. Like, what happened to the other 4,500 you took? They were horrible. It's just that simple. Everything is like that in life, and so in order to have a good idea, you have to try. You have to try to have good ideas. It takes a lot of work. So prototyping is where that comes in. In manufacturing right now, we kind of have this upswing in 3D printing and all that great stuff because it makes ideas coalesce much faster than just sitting in your head and spinning on them. So when it comes to board game design, I use the same methodology of rapid prototyping. I want to try and get something in my hands as quickly as possible to play with. And so I talk about designing one mechanic at a time. When I was that kid and I played Magic the Gathering for the first time and I said, I can do this, I tried, right? And so I set for months and months and months, and I designed this set of cards that was 300 cards and it had all this great stuff. But I never attempted to play the actual game. And the game was horrible. So I just wasted months and months and months trying to make an idea, not a game. And those are two completely separate things, right? So I like to talk to people about rapid prototyping by starting with the MVP, or the minimum viable product. And I have props. I brought props with me. This is my idea box. Now, admittedly, this idea box is worth slightly more than 0. So, but not by much. My idea box goes with me when I'm on the road or when I'm doing anything board game related, because typically that's when ideas happen. And in my idea box, I carry things like Sharpies, because you can never have too many of those. I carry dice and tokens and trinkets. I carry blank cards. And there's probably some other stuff in here too. Hey, old business cards. Random tiles. Or index cards for writing rules down or whatever, making little player boards, whatever I need to make. The first thing I'll do is attempt to mess with the idea. So let's say back to the idea of Magic the Gathering. If we decide we're going to make a card game and we're going to make a card game about two wizards battling, we should probably start with the battling part. We can worry about the rest later on. So say we're going to say, well, I've got this creature and I've got this creature and they're going to attack. So how are they going to attack? Well, this creature's got a strength and this creature's got something. Great. Try it. Make 2 cards and see how that interaction works and see how it feels. Don't start just making this whole system that doesn't exist yet around this idea of a battling card game, right? So I will take whatever the minimum is. If I'm going to do a card game, if I can get away with just using 5 cards to try the system out real quick and see if it works, that's what I'll do. And sometimes I'll literally do it with blank cards. Now I didn't include a video in this, but on my website, CheveeDodd.com, because I'm creative. This year I did a game that I gave away at Gen Con, and that game, I filmed the creation process 100% on camera. I didn't do anything off camera. And I started with just a deck of poker cards with nothing on them and just fiddled with the cards and thought about how I wanted this game to play out and how I wanted the cards to change places or what they were going to be doing before I ever even sat down to work on the game. So I had this concept of how cards would move around the table. I had a concept of how players would play cards and what those cards would do, and I just imagined the cards. I didn't even need to write anything down. That is what I would call a viable product. When you're in that stage, taking notes is extremely important. If you've ever taken a creative writing class, you'll know a lot of writers will carry around index cards or whatever the little folded piece of paper thing is that you can write on, or a Moleskine book, and just write ideas. It doesn't have to be anything important. It just has to be an idea. What if I make a game where you draw 4 cards and you cast, throw 2 over your shoulder or whatever, and so you write it down. It doesn't matter what it is. No idea is worthless to you. It's just not valuable, right? So write it down. Take lots of notes. And I'll come back to that a little bit on the next slide. But this is how you're going to get back to finding the good ideas, is you're going to make a lot of bad ones. And that's okay. You've got to try them or you'll never know. If you just think about it forever, if it just sits in your head, it's just wasting brain cells. You're just using valuable space in your head that you could be using for other things. Put it on paper, try it. If it stinks, put it away. But keep the notes. Don't throw everything away. I never throw everything away. I have a basement full of failed thoughts, right? And that's okay. Because you have to learn how to embrace the failures. Failures will teach you more about life than anything. It's extremely difficult to know why you succeed. It's a really hard thing to figure out because a lot of times it could just be luck. You might have just hit the market at the right time, Minecraft is this really weird thing, but it hit at this key moment in time when that game needed to exist. There had been countless versions of Minecraft before Minecraft existed. It was based on another product that failed. And now it's the largest video game. It's crazy, right? Because that idea happened at that singular point in time when it needed to happen. We would have never known if he hadn't tried, if he hadn't attempted to make something. So it's very difficult to know why you succeed. But it's usually pretty easy to figure out why you failed. Especially when it comes to designing a game. When you get down and you're at the table and you've got your pieces and you go and something happens and somebody goes, no, that doesn't work because, and you go, oh yeah, you're right, I just failed. That's the best learning experience you can have. Learn to embrace failure. Failure is life's lessons. That teaches you how to grow. If you just write off failure and forget about it, then you're doomed to repeat it, right? I don't know how that quote goes. So taking notes about your failures is kind of important. And it's okay to let it go. It's okay to just put it aside. Like I told you, I never throw anything away. That's very true because I have come back to designs. Literally, I have one with me, I think, that was a decade old when I came back to it. And it just hit me one day. Oh, I know how to make that work now. was sitting in my notes bin because I took the notes because I committed it to paper. And it might sound silly, but that's how it works. I don't actually really use paper anymore. I don't know what the next slide is. I don't remember where I'm at. Oh, this is just rapid prototyping, right? Showed you my blank cards. I used to use business cards. Actually, the very first game I ever designed was on the back of somebody's business cards I found. This would be my minimum viable product. This doesn't make any sense to you. But business cards are cut nice and square. They're easy to shuffle, just like regular playing cards. But I have some numbers on here, names. This is a zombie game I attempted. It stunk. So I stopped working on it. But I didn't lose anything. I still have it long enough to at least take that picture. I think it's still in my basement. But I took notes about this game, right? And those are the notes. That's actually the notes for that game. As you can see, it's basically just 2 pages of a legal pad, and that's it. I think it's really important not to take detailed notes. And that might sound silly. And it probably is. But for me, I find that if I take detailed notes, I end up coming back to the point that I was getting it caught on previously. And having too many notes means I'm not able to look at the idea with a fresh angle. And so I try to take notes that are broad. And I don't know if you'll be able to read this, but nowadays I don't use legal pads anymore. I have my Google Keep on my phone, on my tablet. There's probably some stuff in there that shouldn't be up here, but whatever. I keep really general notes, and so this is a game I'm currently working on, and these are the current rules. It's more like a very broad overview that I can follow, but if you picked it up, you would have no clue what was going on. But over here, this is playtest notes. And I have just simple ideas like remove X, meaning, in this particular game, you're in a post-apocalypse, and there's some bad guys. So one of the notes just says, make the bad guys a positive game, not a negative game. Right now, if you don't fight them, you lose. Instead, I'd rather if you fight them, you get something. So it's just this really broad idea. I didn't sit there and try to scribble down exactly what I was thinking, because I just want to let that idea sit for a little while. I'll come back to it later when I'm in a frame of mind that I can step far enough away from where I was that I'm not going to get hung up on the same problems again. I wrote software when I was a kid, and I thought I was going to be a computer programmer. I joined the Marine Corps instead of going to college, and I did write software, and I always found that when I hit a snag, I would always fix that problem the next day when I was going to lunch was when I realized, oh, I know how to fix that. Wasn't even thinking about the issue. So what I would do is I would, outside of my office, I had a ping pong table, and I would set it up with one side up, and I would just go out and play ping pong against myself. And I would constantly fix bugs that way. I don't know why. I'd just go out and play ping pong. And be like, oh, I know how to fix that now. And I go back in the office and fix it. Everybody thought I was crazy, which I was. Oh, that's fine. But it worked. And so this is what my notes do for me. They allow me to not get lost, completely from my original idea, because that's really important. But it allows me to come back with at least some frame of reference so that I can pick up, not where I left off, but maybe from anywhere I go. So not too detailed notes. Okay? After you've done this, and after you have this game, and after you have something playable that you can show people, you gotta try it. And you can't be afraid of this step. But I promise you, this step is absolutely horrible. And we all go through it. You'll play this game, and you'll play this game, and you'll play this game, and it sucks, and you're on the 33rd iteration, and you've changed out half the deck of cards, and you've made a new board 40 times, and by the end of this step, you are completely just done with this whole project. You don't want to work on it anymore. And that's the point when you have to keep going. That's the point when you have to push forward one more time, because that's when you're probably going to become magic. You'll still hate the game. There's no denying it. I have a whole bin of games over here that I've worked on, and I don't play any of them. Unless my girls ask, it just doesn't happen. I'm just tired of playing them. I've played them from the time that they were a horrible idea through to a finished product, and I'm over it at that point. If you like your game, you should be really suspicious of it. Chances are it's terrible. but it's your baby, right? And so you like your baby. You're not going to admit that your baby's not good. If your friends like your game, be very suspicious because they're just trying to make you feel good about yourself. They're your friends, okay? Don't play it. My advice would be not even to try your game with them because they're just going to lie to you, flat out lie to you. And even if you've got, I have good friends that are we've been friends since we were in middle school, and we will trash each other constantly as guys like to do. And yet I'll sit down with a game and they're like, oh yeah, that was good. No, it wasn't. Stop lying to me. I don't need lies. Lies don't help anybody, right? When you take this game out and you play it with somebody you don't know, somebody that doesn't know, you find your worst enemy and try it with them. If that person says, let's play it again, then you know you're done. That's when your game is something. Something more than what you perceive it to be, which is the most important part. That being said, make the games you want to play, right? If you're not, you're going to get tired of it. It's going to be a chore instead of something that you enjoy doing. And I promise you, if you're going to make games, great. There is no rock star game designer. It's not, if you choose that you're going to do this and you're going to try and make games and you're going to not necessarily do it for a living, but you're going to make a habit of it. It's not going to pay the bills. That's simple. I'm an IT guy by trade. Still am. I work for the state doing computer repair for education. This is my fun job. This is the job I'd rather do. But the fact of the matter is, this industry is extremely small. But it can happen. Math is hard. In case you aren't aware, game theory and math is difficult stuff. It really is. I'm not a mathematician. And that's okay though. Most designers work on the field. And this is a picture of me. We were camping one summer and I was working on this game. And you can see I've got all the cards laid out by categories, and I'm just kind of getting this broad overview, and that's pretty much how I start everything that I do. I'm a very spatial learner, so I have to have everything kind of laid out in front of me so that I can see it and manipulate it and know what's going on. And that's initially how I do all of my math. It's all just in my head based on, I don't know, gut feeling, I guess. Which is a bad thing. I fail at it every single time, period. Because when I get to the math shows me that I'm wrong. It's just how it is. But I still try it. It works for me. I still do it. And then I go to a spreadsheet at some point in time. This is my first generation of spreadsheets. Well, actually, this is the 10th version. I don't have that game today. But typically when I get to spreadsheets, I start just tracking components. You can see I've got some buildings in here, and this is their cost, and kind of a quick note on what they do, and how many are in the deck. But this isn't math yet. This is just me keeping track of everything. When it comes time to do math, typically I consult somebody smarter than me, but I also use spreadsheets. I'm really proud of this spreadsheet, even though it's probably and this is only about a quarter of it, even though this is extremely basic stuff. Same game, got buildings, they all have costs, they all have defense values, they all have a general category. In this column over here, I'm keeping track of how many times each resource is used. It's all totaled up. I know how many cards are in the deck, I know how many times, how many battery cards are in the deck, how many times bolts are used in the cost. I have all this stuff calculated so that I can try to keep it as accurate as possible as far as I want to keep the resources roughly equivalent. I don't want anything to stand out, right? But this still isn't math. This is just, I don't want to count because there's 150 cards in this game. And I don't want to try and sit down and count these things. So I do it in a spreadsheet. But I do track all the things, right? When it comes time to do the math, the best advice I can give you is to make friends with the computer science department. These guys can do math. let me tell you. I have a friend who, I designed this board game, and it involved, it was kind of like Ticket to Ride, if you played Ticket to Ride. I had these little cities, and they were each a different color, and you were trying to connect paths. It was different enough, but anyway. So he's like, these two routes on this track are way out of proportion to the rest. And I'm like, what? Like, well, no, like it's equal, I counted it. And he's like, no, let me show you. So like an hour later, he comes back to me with this PHP script. And he's like, I just ran 100,000 iterations, and this route is favored by like 0.25%. And I'm like, what? And he's like, yeah, I mean, this is what I do when I'm doing game design, is I run a simulation and I see what's more favorable. Okay. I can't do that, but I have that friend who can, and that's important. And the other thing comes down to when you're writing rules. Once you've gotten to the point where you're going to sit down and write rules, hopefully you have a game. Hopefully you're not writing the rules first. Some people do work better that way, but I'm not one of those people. If it works for you, great. Computer science guys write processes. That's what they do, and that's basically what a board game is. But it's just a series of processes that leads to a victory. And we have to keep calculations of things along the way. This is a process map, or a flow chart, or whatever you want to call it, for, I didn't even pack that. Whoops. This was a 2-player card game that we did through Portal this year called Time to Time. It's 18 cards, and it's an extremely good game. The designer of that game is a mathematician. And so the cards are almost mathematically perfect. There's 2 cards that are slightly weighted a little heavier than everything else. But he sat down, did the same thing, wrote some simulation software so that he could see what cards were better than others, and we trimmed and we worked and we tweaked. But in reality, we used this process map or this flow chart to really track every step of the game, what was happening, so that we could know if at any point along this path, if something goes wrong here, we can see everything ahead of it that is affected, and we can come back and fix that point, okay? And then this is extremely important when writing rules. This is, if you're going to start here, and you start explaining what happens beyond this point, and then you have to come back to this, it gets really confusing for the reader. And so we try to write rules as close to perfect as possible as far as how the game is played out. Now, that being said, I will usually start off with like a broad generalization before I even get into all this. This is what you're going to be doing, this is how it works, and then I try to dive into it. But I do say build them early, and I mean that, but what I mean is don't attempt to come up with the entire game and then write the rules later, because that's just a nightmare. And I showed you that slide earlier. I do keep rules written from the beginning, but it'll be things like draw 3 cards. Well, I know what that means. Everybody knows what that means. But if I were to print that and put it in a box and sit on a shelf and somebody picked it up, they'd be like, what the heck is it? Where do I draw them from? You know. So I keep these really broad general rules. Again, trying to follow my flow chart. But you have to keep them fluid. When you start on an idea, I try really hard to stay focused on that idea, right? So if I'm going to design a game about shoes, I don't want the end product to be about bananas, unless it really has to be, unless along the way I find some reason. So I try and keep coming back to that. If I find myself drifting and now the game is more about shoelaces than shoes, I try and figure out why I started to head down that path, and I can steer it back on. And keeping your rules fluid allows you to make those changes if you need to without disrupting the entire system. Okay, remember I said if we have a problem here and we have to fix it, then we have to fix everything ahead of it. That's semi-true. But if you have an adjustment, typically won't wreck this whole chart, but at least you'll have the chart and you'll know. And you can ask your computer science guys to rewrite the chart. Keeping them fluid means that they have to be dynamic. Dynamic does not mean chaotic. It does not mean it's a scattershot of random thoughts on a page. That's not going to help anybody, especially you. Trust me, I've come back to games that I've written entire rule sets for, didn't like the game, put it away, came back to it, pulled it out, read the rules, and had no clue what any of it meant. That's not good. But dynamic does mean that they are flexible rules. You are able to adjust. Our CEO, Ignacy, he's a bit of a perfectionist. And we did, what game was it? I think it was Rattle Battle this year. I was writing the rules, and writing the rules, and writing the rules. And we had sent the entire game off to print except for the rules. Usually the rules are done later. Just simply because printing cardboard and cards and sorting all that stuff takes time. So we still have like about a week and a half before the rules had to go to the printer. And I was done with them. They were done. And so he calls me up and he's like, I've got these changes. And I'm like, what are you talking about? And he's like, well, we did some playtesting and I made some changes. I'm like, everything's in print. Like, what do you can't. He's like, the rule book's not printed. I still have time. Okay. So that's the example of dynamic rules. He knows, okay, I've got this set of components and now I'm restricted to using these cards, these dice, these tiles, or whatever they are. But the rule book, I can still make changes as much as I want, as long as I don't have to change any of those physical components. So having that dynamic rule book, having me basically writing his rules for him, meant that he could do whatever he wanted and it was my problem, right? That being said, trying to keep your system immutable does not necessarily mean it's perfect, all right? So trying to say that this is my flow chart, this is it, period, I'm done, does not mean you can't go back and change it, all right? Immutable typically is used in programming to mean that, maybe we have an immutable variable, something you just simply can't change. It's not true, you can always change it. And senior engineers will be mad at you when you do it, but everything's changeable, right? We're not limited. So anyway, rules are important. That seems obvious, I think. They're also probably the hardest part of this whole adventure. Writing rules is a very tough job. I do it professionally, I guess, and I'm not good at it. I still find problems with everything that I do. It's an extremely difficult thing, and if you can find that person who is interested in your idea, having somebody to bounce rules off of is really important. I have a trusted group of about 6 people around the world that I send my rule books to and let them hash them out for me. All right, so we've got a game. We've play tested it. We hate it, but everybody else likes it, so that's a good thing. We just wrote the rules. Now we got to do the graphics. Guess what? The graphics are somebody else's problem. If you're going to seek out publication, I don't care if you hand the publisher a bunch of Monet quality artwork that you spent $10,000 on, they're going to throw it all away and start over. Period. Just that simple. A publisher has their own brand in mind and their own look and feel, and they're going to change everything that you've done. And matter of fact, you just simply can't do it all. There are very, very, very few people who are successful in board gaming who can design games, draw them, do the graphic design, do the layout, write their own rules. It's a difficult thing to do. You've got to assume that you can't be perfect at all of those, so some part of that system is not going to be good. So chances are it's going to be the graphics, because I'm not good at graphics. But you know what? I do it anyway. I don't know, maybe I'm crazy. Maybe I like drawing. My kids like drawing. Everybody here drawing right now. My advice though is don't do it, but if you do, great. I'm not going to really tell you a whole lot about how to draw, because that's everybody's personal thing. I use Inkscape, and this is a video I did that teaches it. Inkscape is freeware. It's basically Illustrator clone that does less than Illustrator, but it's really easy to use. And it's simple. I can sit down, I think this video was like, maybe 35 minutes long for me to draw this bird out, and I totally fleshed it out and did shading and all that stuff. And it's quick and easy. I just used some source art, traced it. I cheat. So you got graphics. Hopefully you paid somebody else to do your graphics, or you have a publisher. The big question is, in today's world, is do I self-publish it or do I find a publisher? there's a lot of merits to both options. The traditional model is much harder, but it also incurs essentially zero risk. Finding publishers is not easy. Trust me. I've been very, very lucky with a couple of my designs that they've been latched onto the moment I showed it to a publisher, but that's extremely rare. But Scallywags was actually, the birth of this game is one of those stories where I had a game idea, put it together in like 20 minutes, and I sent it to a publisher and they bought it. I was like, okay, and gave me this completely skewed view of how this industry works, because that is not how this industry works, I promise you. But I was like, yeah, I'm going to do this full time now. You know, I can just shove stuff out the door and people will buy it. They don't. Publishers will help you make it better, period. The mathematician I told you about who designed our card game Tides of Time is a mathematician, and his game played like a mathematician's game would play. It wasn't bad, it was mathematically perfect, which is boring. It just is. Sorry math guys, but it was boring. The game that he sent us had, I want to say 13 cards, and you know, it was just a little math puzzle, and you're done, and you score points. Okay, that's cool. So we spent 6 months with a game that has 18 cards, developing 5 cards. And really, 2 of them were basically never changed from the first time we wrote them down. So we spent 6 months designing 3 cards for this game to make this 18-card game fun. And that's what a publisher's going to do for your game. They're going to make it better. You're not going to agree with them, but they know better. It's just that simple. Scallywags has quite a few changes from the stuff that I sent, and it's better for it. I still think there's a few things they messed up, but that's just me being an artist, right? But the best part about finding a publisher is they assume all the risk. We printed 10,000 copies of Tides of Time, first print run. We're on a 3rd print run now, and it's only been out for 2 months, 3 months. Nobody can afford to do that just for the heck of it, right? You're all college students. I assume that none of you have, you know, $30,000, $40,000 sitting in the bank. You're like, yeah, I'm just gonna order 10,000 copies of this thing I made. It's just not gonna happen. We assume the risk. We assume the responsibility to sell and market that product to an audience. And we seek out the people who are going to pay us for your product. And then we give you a check. And all you had to do was spend a year designing a game that you hate. It's that easy. Self-publishing, the self-publishing model is more fun if you don't like having fun. Let me tell you, I did a card game called Pull on Kickstarter last year. I did it 100% myself because I didn't do that. I did all the artwork, everything. Well, I didn't do the manufacturing. I don't have a printer in my basement that big. I spent 6 months on that project. A full month on Kickstarter, answering 1 billion emails. And at the end of it, I probably spent a good solid 4 months in some of the deepest depression I've ever had in my entire life. It was miserable. And I would do it all again. Maybe I'm a masochist. It is more fun. You get to learn all of the things about this industry that fans don't know. You get to find out what it's like to talk to manufacturers. You get to find out how many cards are on a sheet and how many, you know, colors you can use if you want to spend X dollars. You get to do all this fun economic stuff that's not fun, I promise you, and try to figure out, you know, MSRP, and how you're going to get distribution done, and how you're going to fulfill orders, and all this crazy stuff, all right? And I've heard a lot of people say, this is the old joke in the board game industry is, how do you make a small fortune in the board game industry? You start with a large one, and that's true. But more importantly, it is, don't start a board game company unless you like companies more than you like board games. It's just that simple. I spent 6 months on nothing but that game. I don't even think I played anything else but that game for 6 straight months just to deliver, I don't know, I think I had a little over 300 backers, which is just absolutely crazy. It's just nuts. But it's fun. If you want to do it, there's a lot of options. Like print on demand is an option. I've got a couple. Directory Cards and the Game Crafter are two companies that do cards. Directory Cards does exclusively cards. The Game Crafter can do a full board game. And I brought one with me, but I think I left it in the car, that I did with him. They do boards and everything. So you can do print on demand. It's expensive, but it's cool to have your game, you know, especially if you're doing like a senior project and you need to have a board game or whatever. You can actually have it in your hands. Like I made this. They also have stores. So my games that are on the Game Crafter, you can go there right now and order them. They'll print it and ship it to your house. I don't have to touch it. I get my whatever percentage I get out of that sale. And then the big shakeup recently is crowdfunding. I think that's obvious. Everybody knows about crowdfunding. But in the board game industry, it has completely changed how we do business. There are a lot of traditional publishers who are now using crowdfunding. I think this year at Gen Con, if I would say probably 30% of the hall was just Kickstarter publishers. People who didn't even have products to sell. They were just there to show you their game that they're going to put on Kickstarter. That's all good and all, but you're not going to make money on Kickstarter. It's just that simple. It's not really the intention. The intention is for you to start a company and create a product that you can continue to sell, whereas most people use it as a way to market, and that's not what Kickstarter does. So you'll see a lot of stuff on Kickstarter, and I've bought Kickstarter games, and most of them you'll never see again because the person can't afford to start a board game company. Just that simple. But there are options. If you want to do it, do it. I've known. In '96, I was at Origins in Columbus, and that was when I was working with United States Playing Cards, and right across the hall from me was this little booth, and this guy, and he had a table, and he had this little rack with some stuff on it, and he sat there for the whole show, did nothing, just sat there, because nobody stopped at his booth. I mean, he didn't have a sign up or anything. And I felt kind of bad for the guy. And then one night, Origins, if you've never been, you need to go, had 24-hour gaming, so you could just go at night and play games all night, right? So that Saturday night, dude, this guy comes out and he has a briefcase and he opens up and he says, "Who wants to play some games?" So he pulls all these games, and this guy was James Ernest. He's the founder of Cheap Ass Games, and he literally manufactured all these games himself, like on an offset, single color printer, guillotine cutter, put them in an envelope, and there you go. You can do that, and he was extremely successful at it. So much so that other people attempted to emulate him and failed, but the company's still around. He's still making games. You could go full on. Steve Jackson Games did Car Wars. The original version of Car Wars was sold in a Ziploc bag. It was just printed on a printer, like a regular old printer. Put in a Ziploc bag and set in store shelves. So you don't have to make a pretty product. That's the neat part about board games. A lot of people who play board games don't really care. But the number one rule is you got to make games that you want to play. If you're making games that you don't want to play because somebody asked you to make a game about whatever, and you're not excited about the project, the game's not going to be good. It's just that simple. If you look at most licensed products that's out there, there's very few companies right now who are making licensed games that are actually fun to play. For the most part, they're just terrible. It's done, on a contract. And the biggest one is if you're not having fun, you're doing it wrong. Even all that stuff I talked about, like I said, I did 4 months of some seriously horrible depression after that Kickstarter, and I still had fun with that whole project, and I would do it again. I really would. That 300th time you play tested a game and it's completely falling apart in front of you and you just want to scream, I'm still having fun. And that's important. If you lose sight of that, then the whole thing falls apart, and you don't want to do this anymore. And I tell you, this is fun. It really is. When I travel, I think that's my last slide. When I travel, I don't like leaving my girls when I go places. And when I go places, Gen Con this year was, we were way busier than we thought. And I was working 9 a.m. to 11 p.m. every day. Working, and I still had fun. It was still just a blast. I'm working on board games, and I'm making fun happen, and people are paying us for fun. That's pretty cool, right? And even now, it's a paying hobby for me, and it's my fun job. It's a job I'd rather do. It's fun, I can do it mostly from home, and they can help me. we've designed some games together. So, but that's what I've got. I'm here for questions too. So, anything you want to know?